Just a couple other things in terms of Joel's ordination. We're going to have the service, as has been said, at 12:45. When we allow family and friends to exit first, I think what we're going to do is let them do that. We don't know how many people are going to be here. So what I'm probably going to ask is after the service, if those of you who stayed, because the reason why Joel planned the service right after the morning is because he wanted us to be here. And there are other people from other churches invited as well. So what I think I'm going to do is those of you who are able-bodied and can park your car across the bridge, I'd like to make as much space in the parking lot as we can for those guests who we will have coming from other churches, and we don't know exactly how many are going to be here. So maybe if you're able to, stick around, but maybe move your car across so if we have other guests from other churches who are going to come here, they'll have a place to park and they won't have to park in Del Rapids. Okay, good. Have the first slide. We're talking about songs that soothe. And psalms are really songs. And if you look at the book of Psalms, there's 150 psalms really from 5 different collections. And these psalms are Jewish songs, but they're songs with a distinctive purpose. The psalms are vehicles to convey the feelings and attitude of any worshiper in a similar situation. I want you to look at that. This is the purpose of the psalms. They are vehicles that we can use to convey the feelings and attitudes in a similar situation. So we who find ourselves in similar circumstances can use these songs to express honest feelings to God. And again, if you look at the Psalms, the Jewish people in particular were very emotive. Scandinavians, some of us from different descents, are not very expressive. In the Middle East, individuals are very expressive. They tend to be in Jews specifically. And so you find that these psalms are very expressive, very emotive, and they give us their vehicles by which we can express honest feelings to God. There are a handful of psalms that are identified with specific events in David's life. He writes a number of these psalms. In fact, he was a musician, and Saul recruited him to do that. Some of these are linked with specific events in David's life, which gives us the added bonus of being able to know what happened and know what he was thinking about God when it happened. And we're going to find this morning, this is especially interesting. We're going to look at the second of 6 of these psalms this morning. It was a song that was birthed in times of desperation. Let's read the psalm David wrote, and then we're going to consider the circumstances under which he wrote it. In your worship folder, there's a sheet. On the back of it, it has Psalm 34. I'm going to read that, and then we will make some observations, think about the situation in which he wrote it, and then we'll try to apply that to our lives. Here's what David writes, sings, I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. My soul will boast in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man called, and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his saints. For those who fear him lack nothing. The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Come, my children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. The face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. A righteous man may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. He protects all his bones. Not one of them will be broken. Evil will slay the wicked. The foes of the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems his servants. No one will be condemned who takes refuge in him. A couple phrases we're going to look at in some words. It says, let the afflicted hear and rejoice. The afflicted are those who, relative to thoughts and circumstance, are depressed and needy. They're not having a good day. They're afflicted. There's something happening to them that they don't want to happen. They want to be experiencing this, and they're experiencing that. They want to be doing one thing, they have to do another thing. And because of these, they are distressed. They don't like their life. It says their faces are never covered with shame. Those who look intently to the Lord, their faces are never covered with shame. And shame really is, and this is going to be interesting when we read about what David did just before he wrote this. But shame is blushing. It says you're never in a place when you call out to God, when you're as righteous, where you're going to blush, where you're going to ultimately be ashamed. It says the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. That's an interesting word. And we're going to talk about that now, and I'm going to call attention to that. So I'm going to want you to remember this word, brokenhearted. And it literally means to burst forth. In fact, it's a word that it's associated with being broken, but it's really, the root of the word is childbirth. Childbirth. When the fetus enters the birth canal, there's a sense of crushing, a sense of constriction, which leads to an immersion, a coming out. Brokenhearted. It has the sense of bursting forth. And we'll pick that up, and it says, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And that's what the psalm focuses on, God's closeness. The person who calls to him needs to be ashamed. Now, let's look at the backdrop for this psalm. The backdrop, it's about human weakness. Let me give you some history to lead you up to this point. After David killed Goliath, King Saul put him to work, had him do a couple of things. Gave him a commission in the army, gave him some men to command, and David did really well. And so they were saying, Saul has slain his thousands, but David has 10,000s. He did very well in the military. But he wasn't just a military man. He was a musician. And Saul had some emotional problems. We don't know exactly what. It seems that he was kind of bipolar. He would go up and down, pretty unstable. And he would get in these places where the only thing that would soothe him was music. And even before David became a military mighty man, he was summoned to play the harp, to play songs, to sing songs. And what Saul found is that when he heard the sounds, when he heard the words, it had a soothing effect. There's different ways to moderate feelings, aren't there? One way is to try to pretend that the feelings don't exist, to try to push them away. And there is a sense of relief, but it's not a deep relief, is it? What the Psalms would encourage us to do, that in order to moderate feelings, a good way to moderate them is to mediate them. You know the difference between mediate and moderate? Moderate is when you try to just turn something down. Mediate is when you come in contact with it, when you admit it, you touch it, you embrace it. You say, you know what, I am discouraged, rather than saying, how do you feel? I'm fine. You know, when we try to do that, we try to moderate our feelings because we don't want to get out of control. But what the Psalms would encourage us to do is to mediate feelings, to connect with them. And our fear, I think, sometimes is that we admit a feeling. Some of us aren't really good at identifying our feelings. And our fear is that if I say I'm angry, won't the anger overwhelm me? What we find, mediating a feeling, when you touch it, it gives you the opportunity to deal with it. Some of us, what we do with feelings is we push them down. We just try to push them behind a wall. You know what the problem with that is? When you bury a feeling, you bury it alive. And then you lose the ability to be able to determine how that feeling is going to come out. What happens oftentimes, we bury feelings, and they don't stay buried long. And they come out, but not in the way we would want them to come out, and not with the ability to control them. Sometimes we flip out and we say, what you mean? And what we don't understand is that reaction comes from back here when we took this feeling and went like this. But this feeling didn't stay dead long. Again, when we deal with feelings, we bury them alive. You know what the psalmist would have us do? Touch it. These are vehicles to express strong emotions. And what you're going to find here in the Psalms are difficult questions. God, where did you go? Oh, we couldn't say that to God, could we? Geez, we could never say that. God, I feel like you've abandoned. Oh, ooh. You know, some of us, if we did things like that, would feel like, well, you have to put the lightning rod up. Because if you're that honest with God, he's going to torture. But what we find in the psalmists is that they are open. They're honest. You know what the deal is between you and I? God already knows how you feel. There you go. So sometimes we say, well, I can't say it out loud because that will, what? He already knows it. You know what? If you said things out loud to God, you know what that would be the beginning of? A relationship. Relationship. Not a fake relationship. Relationship. Fake relationship. You know what I mean. Anyways. Did David kill Goliath? Saul put him to work. Had him be his songwriter, his musician, to calm him. His commander, to do his battles. David did very well. But his success triggered ambivalent feelings in Saul. So at one point, Saul is going, oh, sing that verse again, David. And then he thinks, oh, he's the one that's everybody's ascribing more kills to him than to me. And where's my spear? And he tries to throw it at him. And he did that to him. Again, Saul wasn't very stable. Not a good boss. His ambivalent feelings toward David turned progressively dark. Jonathan was Saul's son. When right after David killed Goliath and Saul summoned David, Jonathan heard David. And it's interesting, he said he became one in spirit with, you know what, really? His spirit and David's spirit connected. And it says he loved David as himself. And because he loved David as himself, he made a covenant. And what he said is this. In fact, what he did, he stripped off his armor, he gave him his sword, and basically what he did, because he was the second in line, he said, you know what, David? Here's what I know. I know that there's something that resonates about you. I understand you. And he was telling him, basically, you're going to be the next king. Here's my sword. Here's my next in line robe, all that stuff. Jonathan tried to protect David, but Saul, his father, learned of it and tried to kill Jonathan. So David finally has to flee without men and weapons. And this is where he goes to. He flees to Gath. Now, who do you imagine comes from Gath? Give you some clues. He's really tall. And he has a rock right about here. He has a big sword, a big spear. So you know what David has to run to? Goliath's hometown. There you go. And this is how desperate he was. And guess whose sword he has? Goliath's. So here we go. So you got that scene? David is, and again, he has to flee. So he runs to Gath, and he has to appear before, and it says either calls the king Abimelech or Achish. So here's what happens. And I'm looking at 1 Samuel 21. David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David's his tens of thousands. David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So, not one of David's finer moments. He pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, "Look at the man. He is insane. Why bring him to me?" I love this question. Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? I mean, am I short of lunatics? And I wonder if there's a jibe. I've got enough lunatics right around me without you having to bring this one in. I mean, look it. I'm not sure if that's what happened or not. But must this man come into my house? Desperation. And David ends up having to do this. And you know when he wrote Psalm 34? After he acted like a crazy person. Isn't that interesting? Afflicted. But his face wasn't covered with shame. I don't completely understand that. You look back on things that we had to do to survive and feel terrible about it. And apparently David has such a connection that he's aware, but he is so captivated with who God is that he gazes at God and glances at himself. That's a significant thing. That's what David could do. He had the ability to have his gaze and glance in the proper place. He gazed at God, had a picture of God that encompassed compassion, and so he could turn to God even when it wasn't one of his finer moments. Some of us, we only feel like we can connect God when we're doing it well and saying it right. And at the end of the day, if we've done well that day, we talk to God in prayer, and it's like, hey, I did pretty good today. Hey, God, waiting for a vacancy in the Trinity. You did catch me today, didn't you? We feel great. I had a great day. Did good things. Didn't do bad things today. But what about those other days? Now, you know the days. The days if somebody saw what we did and would be embarrassed, or they did say what they did and we had problems. Those days. Those days are harder to talk to God. Easier to do this. You know what, David? David didn't do this. He knew God was his shepherd. He knew God was for him. And in times of need, he looked to him. Even in times of desperation. What happened after that? So he ends up hopefully shaving his beard. He got drizzle in his beard, and he got all this stuff. Look what it says in 1 Samuel 22. David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him. And he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. Next slide. Who did God use to build his kingdom? Go ahead. Those who were in distress. You know what in distress means? You're in a tight spot. Distress literally means confined. It's a narrow place that you can neither turn to the right or to the left. You don't have many options. You've been forced into a corner. That's what it means to be in distress, to be in debt. These are people who, because of the economy at the time, they were indebted. They were dependent on others for resources. They didn't have a retirement package. They were in distress, in debt, and they were discontented. They were bitter. And these were the people that God used to build his kingdom. Which, interesting. You can say a number of things. Well, what can you say about that, though? Those who were distressed, indebted, and discontented, they were in a tight, hard place. And you know what God did through them? Same thing he did with David. David was in a similar spot. And when David was in that confined place, that broken-hearted place, you know what God did? Birthed a king in the tight place. Because God's close to the brokenhearted. The brokenhearted are those who are leaving a comfortable environment like the womb, being forced into this canal that constricts. And imagine what a fetus feels like as it moves from that place of protection, moves into the birth canal. It doesn't want to be there, where it's confined, cordoned off. It must feel terrifying. It's being born, but it doesn't know that. All it knows is it feels like that, in distress, tight place, dependent, bitter. Leave me alone. Just let me stay in a comfortable place. I just want to go back there. I want to go back there. Everything's provided for me there. Why am I being pushed out? Why are you pushing me out of this place? God's close to the brokenhearted. That's how he builds his kingdom. The beginning of David's kingdom, you know what occurs to me? The way God does things? A painful from usually comes before a peaceful to. A painful from comes before a peaceful to. He has to call us out of things. In fact, you know what the church literally means? Called out ones. And you know where you're called out from? A place sometimes that feels comfortable. Leave me here. Just let me stay here. And God goes, come here. But this is a tight place. I want to go back there. I want to go to a place that I can move around where I have some options. I have no options here. And it feels like we are coming to the end of something. And we feel that God's far away. We're brokenhearted, confined. But God's close to the brokenhearted. This is how God birthed a king. And you know what it is, too? This is how God birthed the kingdom. Question. How much do you think it mattered that these individuals heard, did you hear what David did? Could we talk? And this is maybe in Saul's kingdom. He was dribbling on his beard like a crazy person. He was that desperate. He wasn't so far above us. And you know what I imagine them doing? There's a guy maybe that I could get involved with. I know he's a mighty warrior, but he's also real. And these individuals went to David at the cave of Adullam. Would they have gone there? See, when we see David and he's acting like a crazy person before Achish, king of Gath, we end up saying, weakness. You know what God is doing? Divine power. He's birthing a king and birthing a kingdom. You know who those 400 became? The core of David's kingdom, his mighty men. That's interesting. I think a painful from precedes a peaceful to. Well, isn't that John the Baptist? Why did John the Baptist have to come before Jesus? Really? Why did John the Baptist have to come before Jesus? I mean, Jesus is fully capable of teaching, isn't he? Calling people to God. Do you know why John the Baptist had to come before Jesus? I'm gonna do something with Randy. So let's say Randy is in this system that's really secure. Let's call it Judaism. And what John the Baptist did, give me your hand, Randy. He exerted a from influence. John the Baptist, thanks, Randy. He exerted a from. And the from, and so with the disciples, 11 of the 12 disciples had been from the north under the influence of John the Baptist's ministry. Because of John the Baptist, they had emerged some from Judaism. And when Jesus said, come to me, there had been enough from to accommodate a to. Do you understand that? Who is the one disciple who was from the south, 10 miles away from Jerusalem? Which disciple was that? Judas Iscariot. You know who Judas Iscariot is? Judas, the man from Kerioth. Kerioth is 10 miles away from Jerusalem. Do you know what Judas's problem might have been? There wasn't a from. There wasn't a from. And so there couldn't be a 2. He was too much under the sway and influence of the Pharisees. So when they said, 30 pieces of gold, if you'll turn him in, he couldn't say no to that because he was too close. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes in order to call us to something, God calls us from something. And the from is painful, constricting. It's moving from a comfortable place to an uncomfortable place. It feels like we're at the end of something. We feel like God's far away. God is close to the brokenhearted. And the reason why I say this with some heat is some of you understand exactly what I mean. You were in very comfortable environs with things that were predictable. And then you got called out with all these circumstances, and you're doing and saying things that you don't want to be doing and saying. You don't feel like yourself, and you're wondering, am I at the end of a road here? Am I going to be dispatched into this oblivion? You know what it might be? God might be birthing something in your life. Birthing something in your life. Because here's the deal. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. The one who is confined, confused, seemingly cut off. God isn't far away. He's closer than your next breath. That's how God births things. Divine power and human weakness. A match made in heaven. A match made in heaven. Because his power is made perfect in weakness. We're going to look at that verse. Power is made perfect in weakness. Listen to me. Divine power and human weakness is a match made in heaven. So when God's going to move you from here to there, you're going to come to the end of yourself. Now, hopefully, we're not going to have to go to the degree of infamy that David went to, dribbling but we'll have to have things exposed that we'd rather not be exposed. We're going to have to see ourselves saying and do things that we really don't want to say and do. And what David would have you say is this: listen, God calls to the afflicted. You stay with him. You stay with him. And your face will not be covered with shame. You feel ashamed now. You hang in with him. You know why? Because the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. Painful from a peaceful to, it's a match made in heaven. Who does God use to build his kingdom? Go ahead, next slide. I'm going to read this verse, a couple of verses before we close. God who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God, not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. We have this treasure in jars of clay. Treasures here is the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. The light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. What is God like? What's God like? Is he like the spiritual being that existed on the top of Mount Sinai? Is God scary? Is he? Is God somebody to be frightened of? They were frightened at Mount Sinai. Is that what God is like? You know what the Bible says? The law is a shadow. The law is a shadow. Mount Sinai wasn't really God's face. It was God's shadow. Can you see my shadow? You probably could. If I got in the light here, yeah, there's a shadow here. And I'm looking at this shadow. You can't tell much from a shadow. You can tell some proportions. Geez, I have a big head. No, I'm just kidding. So you can tell something about proportions. Can I tell what my face looks like in that shadow? The law is a shadow. It wasn't God on Mount Sinai. It was a shadow of God. And you could know something. Where did we get to see God's face? How do we know what God is like? Jesus reveals God's face. Jesus reveals God's face. See, it's not that Jesus is good and God the Father is scary. That wasn't him. That was his shadow. Jesus reveals God. What is God the Father like? He's like Jesus. It's not Jesus is the nice one and God the Father is the angry one. They're the same. You say, wait. That's the deal. And some of us, I didn't know that. Know that. Jesus reveals God's face. What is Jesus like? What is God like? What is Jesus like? If you were a person in distress and needy, did you need to be afraid of Jesus? If you were arrogant and felt like you walked on water, did you have an issue with Jesus? Absolutely. If you put a load on other people, did you have issues with Jesus? Absolutely, because he loves them. But if you come up and say, listen, I just don't know, that come follow me. Jars of clay, what it says about a jar of clay. Again, jar of clay, that seems like a nice thing, but if this, okay. Oh, great. Hope I'm not going to spill this. These things just come to me. These visions come to me. It's not me. It's these things come to me. Okay, this is a plastic jar. If this was a crystal vase, I would never put it in harm's way. I would put it up somewhere out of the way, like we do in our house when there is the hutch. And it was in my house growing up. What goes in the hutch? Are they the dishes that go on the end table? Do the dishes that you stack on the end table, do they go in the hutch? Absolutely not. What about Thanksgiving dishes? Do Thanksgiving dishes go in your dishwasher? Not in ours. No. And that's so. Again, what's my point? What's your point, Mike? Yeah. What's your point? Okay. You know what a jar of clay is? This is a jar of clay. I don't have to put this up out of the way. It doesn't go in the hutch. You know what happens to a jar of clay? It gets hit. It gets treated in an ordinary way. We have this treasure in jars of clay. You know what that means? God's not invested in putting you in a pain-free place. Now, that's not very funny. God is not invested in giving you a tension-free life. You know why? Because he's close to the brokenhearted. And for spiritual life to be birthed, there's got to be tension. It's going to feel like you're moving from an expanse into a place there's no options. That's how God births kings and kingdoms and spiritual life. Those are the kind of people to and through whom he works. Jars of clay, they're hard-pressed, perplexed, persecuted, and struck down. What kind of people does God use to build his kingdom? Go to the next one. We have another passage. Who does God use to build his kingdom? Look what it says, 2 Corinthians 12. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Paul must have gotten some kind of thorn in the flesh. He got a thorn in the flesh. We don't know what it was. Maybe when he had that vision, we were thinking Bible study this morning. And maybe when he had that, remember we saw Jesus on the road and he was struck blind? Maybe he inherited an eye problem from that. It could have been his eyes. He might have had some type of vision issue, some type of painful thing that made you look at him and say, geez, he's not a candidate for Glory of God monthly. Look at him. I mean, he's bandy-legged. Bandy-legged must be something like this, and he doesn't have much hair. Like I said, that's a good thing. But he doesn't appear to be very glorious. And he says, so he asked Jesus, here's the deal. Some people are discrediting my message because they look at me and they say, no, we think somebody who represents God should be more like crystal. More like a crystal vase. Because doesn't God protect and insulate people he uses? Doesn't he? Does he? If God's going to use you, will he keep you from painful places? The answer is, will you end up going into painful places? Will you go there alone? No, you won't. Because he's close to the brokenhearted. But we get in that place and we say, where did you go? And he's right there. But that's how he births kings and kingdoms and life. Do you know what weakness is? His power is made perfect in weakness. We like to think weakness as something like this. Well, I'm not a very good singer. But here goes anyways. God lets me sing. I'm not a very good speaker. You know what weakness is? Weakness is not really about an incapacity. Weakness is my inability. I'm going to pick on somebody else. Say Jay has an issue with me. You know what weakness is? Weakness is that I don't have the ability to keep Jay from doing things to me that hurt. That's what weakness is. He insults me and they land. He persecutes me. He makes things difficult for me. That's what weakness is. Weakness is your inability to get people to treat you the way you want to be treated. Why doesn't he do what I want? Why does he push me? Why does she do that? God, why don't you stop that? You know what he say? Because power is made perfect in weakness. Because when insult hurts you, now again, I'm not going to line up for this. I'm not going to stand up. Who wants to be insulted line? That's who God uses to build his kingdom. One more slide. Who does God use? I think we're going to land on this. One more. Next one. Who does God use to build his kingdom? Those he delivers. Do you know what delivery? Think of delivery relative to childbirth. What is delivery? It's from and it's to, isn't it? Delivery is always from and to. Who does God use to build his kingdom? Those he delivers. He calls them from, and that is painful. But he calls them to, and that ends up being peaceful. Those he calls from and those he calls to. We're going to sing a song. Got a question while they're going to come up in a second. What from have you experienced? You were in a place that was associated with security, and you had to leave it. What from have you experienced? And you end up going to this place where you feel cut off. Some of you are there right now. Right this minute you're there. In a place that there are no options. It's like, well, you're in a tight spot. And you wonder where God went. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. God is always the kind of father who is there at the point of childbirth. At the point when things are being birthed. It could be that God is delivering you from a place so that he could deliver you to a place where you could be involved in birthing things that last forever. I'm going to pray for us in just a second. Again, we're going to allow those. In fact, why don't you guys start to go out? And I'll give us some instructions. I'm going to pray in a little bit. Let's let our guests go first. And so let's do this then. Please stay if you can. Again, the reason why we're doing this afterwards, we're going to have a light lunch of some soup and bread. Would love you to stay. Joel would love you to stay. That's why he wanted to plan it at this time. At 12:45, we'll do a commissioning service, ordination service, that won't be that long. It will involve his father and his grandfather. It'll be special. And if you can stay, please do. And some of you are not going to be able to. We understand that. But then again, if you would, we're going to let them go through the line first. And if you're in position to, and if you can, stick around. Some of you are going to have to get in your car and go, but others of you get in your car and park them across the place. It might be, we might not need it, but let's at least be prepared so that we can have close spots for the people that come. Make sense? Okay. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for your call, and thanks for Joel and the opportunity we've had to have him here for these 7 years. Thank you for his commitment to your word, how he stands in it. It's what informs him. It's what he tells kids. It's what he tells adults. It's what he reflects. I ask that you would continue to bless him. Thank you that you've placed him here at this time and that we can have him among us. I pray that today is a special time. Thank you, though, for the way you birth things in and through us and that your power is made perfect in weakness. In those places, it has the impact and is attributed to the one whom it should be attributed to. When we're all shiny and glorious, sometimes we end up being the ones who get targeted as being the source of power. But when we're weak, when we're in positions where it doesn't seem like that should be the case, then you end up getting the credit. And that's with divine power, that works. Has the right impact. It gets attributed to the right person. Thanks for how you do that. In Jesus' name, amen.